Hey everybody, I'm Kathy Klotz-Guest and welcome to the Improv and Innovation Cafe. I'm really excited about today's episode because I get to talk to somebody who knows all about humor in the workplace, and that is my guest, Andrew Tarvin. So I know Drew from, the hood, the improv hood, but I'm going to give him the proper introduction that every great guest deserves. So Andrew Tarvin is a humor engineer, and I love that. And I know he actually worked as an engineer, so he knows what he's talking about. He teaches people how to enjoy their jobs and to do their jobs better. And Andrew has worked with thousands of people at a lot of really great and large companies. He's worked with P&G, Procter & Gamble, huge organization, GE, Microsoft, on topics ranging from mastering novice communications to humor in the workplace. I know him as a fellow member of the Applied Improv Network, and I got to catch up with him recently in June at Funny Biz. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yay. I'm going to call you Drew just because that's how I know you.
Perfect.
But yeah, it is Andrew for those people who are looking, who want the formality of it, but he's very informal and approachable, so we're just going to call him that. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I just want to give a little kind of primer about what we try to do with these Google Hangouts. As you know, if you've heard my other episodes, I'm a big believer that nobody ever calls me and says, hey, my improv is broken. My humor is broken. Please come and fix my humor. It just doesn't happen. I wish that were the calls that I get. People have real business challenges, and what we've tried to do with these Hangouts is really have people on who can talk through how improv and humor and the tools in our toolbox can help meet real business needs. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Drew today is that, even though a lot of the work I do is in storytelling and marketing and with brands, I know firsthand that if your people are unhappy and there's low morale, that your customers aren't going to be happy. So I believe it all starts internally. And so humor in the workplace isn't a nice to have. I really think it's about employee engagement. It's about getting the best out of your people. So I think it's an incredibly important topic to talk about marketing. It's a little upstream for marketing, but you can't have great employees, happy employees, and happy customers without it. So that's the context I want to talk about today. So let's all jump in. So Drew, what are you seeing? You're sort of right there on the front lines of this. Do you think that receptivity to kind of humor at work and an engaged workforce is people are more receptive to that than they were a few years ago? What are you seeing?
I think so. Yeah, I think things are evolving for a couple of reasons. I think one of them is certainly you have the idea of the startup culture, and you hear about things like Google or the Facebooks of the world, and I think that's impacting some of the work because a lot of it may even be driven generationally. The stereotypes that you hear about millennials and that kind of stuff in the workforce, the things that they're asking for, things that everyone kind of wants. At the end of the day, you realize, oh, you want meaningful work. You want your the work that you're doing to have an actual large impact on what you want to do. You want to have flexible work schedules. You want to be empowered, and you want to enjoy what you do. Those are all things that millennials are asking for that older generations are also seeing it, and they're like, wait, those are good things. I want them as well. And so you're seeing the top companies realizing that and using that to attract people coming in, whether it is Google or Facebook, the startup culture as well changing a little bit, but even more conservative organizations are starting to shift that way and recognize that because the old loyalty to a company doesn't really exist anymore because the loyalty to employees doesn't always exist, right? Younger generations have grown up with the Enrons of the world and those types of things happening and the layoffs that they've seen across the board in different areas, and so they're like, I want to do work that I enjoy, and so if I'm going to stick at this company, I better actually have fun with what I do.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I think Gen Y, it's a very different generation, and their relationship to work is different, and they get it. And I think there's a why not. I'm seeing much more of a why not, taking risks, having fun. And I love that you say, older generations want it too. They do. I just think that they never thought it was possible with the sort of matrixed organizations that they grew up with. They just kind of accepted that, okay, there's work and then there's fun, and they may not be the same thing. And I think millennials are like, well, why can't they be? It seems like they should be, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the work itself has changed. I mean, I'm an engineer by training and by mindset, and so I know what it means to be obsessed with efficiency, and that as far as leadership and interacting with other people made sense when we were in the Industrial Revolution, when saving 10 seconds of emotion led to millions of dollars of cost savings because you were repeating a line on a factory line over and over and over again. But now that we've shifted more to a knowledge economy and knowledge workers, we've got to change the way that we work, and efficiency no longer is what works for leadership and with groups. It's more about how do we be effective and how do we better engage human beings, because we're not robots. And humor happens to be an effective way to do that.
Yeah, 92.3% of all audiences are in fact made of people, and people like to be treated, little known fact. It is comical, but you're right. I mean, it's one of those things where, and I've heard you talk about it, this sort of the efficiency effectiveness curve that you're alluding to, and you're absolutely right. I think the recognition that there's diminishing returns when we start to cut things so much and act like people are robots, you're dealing with people at the end of the day, and you just cannot give to your customers what you yourself are not getting. And if you're not getting engagement in the workplace, and if you're not having fun, if you're not feeling respected and valued, I mean, I don't know how people thought for so many years that there was this wall, this sort of sound wall, that everything that happened inside the company stayed there and never leaked to the outside. And that's just, that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to impact your relationship with customers. It's also going to impact your relationship with management and that kind of thing. One of the things that you're seeing, which becomes an interesting challenge now, is the people who are managing the Gen Ys as they come in are people who don't necessarily understand the change in process, or they may or may not be disengaged themselves. And so if your manager is disengaged in the work that they do, then you're only going to learn that, or you're not going to enjoy your work as much. And 31% of people, I think it's 31% of people leave their job because of their manager. They might like the company, they might like the work, but if they don't like their manager, they're going to leave. And so you have, it has that impact. And if they're going in every single day and impacting that, how is that going to translate into the marketing that they create or the client relationships that they develop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
No question, no question. And what are you seeing out there in terms of companies that are innovative, that are really thinking about this on the vanguard of humor as sort of a tool for engaging employees? Are there companies out there that you are seeing and working with that you're like, wow, they're really doing some pretty innovative stuff here?
Yeah, I mean, the big case studies out there, the Zappos of the world, the Southwests of the world that talk about those things. Costco as well, in terms of treating their employees well, and also paying them like higher salaries and stuff like that than other groups are used to. So you see some of those things. But I think what I'm seeing, or at least maybe what I'm pushing, is that it's not even just always at the organization level. I think the training that I try to create is around the individual. Because at the end of the day, certainly the culture that's at your company is a big part of it. But at the end of the day, you decide how you're going to do your work. You decide if you're going to find ways to enjoy it. You may not create a job that you absolutely love, but you can find ways to approach it in a way that's more fun, more humorous, and more effective.
That's such a great point. I think a lot of times we do look at the culture and say, gosh, we don't have any control over that. And in a lot of ways that's true. But to your point, I think at a department level, you can certainly be responsible for upgrading your fun quotient. You can have an impact. And so this idea of, well, we just don't control things. Well, yeah, I mean, it's turning around a tanker. I mean, we're talking about a big organization, a behemoth organization that has a big culture. That's true. But that sort of microclimate or microculture of your own department, there's no reason you can't start there. Fun doesn't need permission, and it doesn't need approval necessarily. It doesn't need the approval. It certainly helps, and I think it is a big corporate value, and you see it makes a difference. But I think at your own sort of level, you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's going to help impact your own personal effectiveness as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because you're an improviser and I'm an improviser, and I know how fun you are. He's very funny, by the way, and he has, by the way, I'm just going to say, he has some of the best puns I've ever heard. They're fun. How are you using improv and humor, and maybe expand a little bit about your definition of humor, because I know I'm asking a lot here. I think a lot of times people hear humor at work and they think, oh, jokes, or that kind of stuff, and you and I both know that is just a narrow definition of humor. Humor is so much bigger than that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the definition of humor is very important, and I define it as, or or I use a dictionary definition of it that says it's a comic, absurd, or incongruous quality causing amusement. And I think that's an important definition because the idea of comedy is certainly included in that definition, but it's also something that's maybe a little bit silly or really something that's just different, unexpected, that causes amusement. So it's not necessarily about making people laugh so much as making them smile. So what I talk about is I say, using humor in the workplace isn't about making work funny, it's about making work fun. And I think that that's an important understanding because it's not about, okay, learn, go and get a joke book and learn a bunch of jokes and then just tell them. But, as you know, it's storytelling, it's using applied improv exercises in the work that you do, it's having music as people come into an event, it's asking questions, interesting questions at the beginning of a meeting, it's sending a quotation or a joke or a link at the bottom of an email. It's small things that you can do that basically add amusement to the day. And that's going to lead to more effective results. It's going to get people to pay attention more. It's going to build relationships. It'll help enhance problem solving, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's my thought. And I think improvisation is a powerful way to do that. One, it's a great example of using humor in the workplace with applied improv. But also, as we know, yes and as a mentality and as a mindset, to me, adding humor to your work is an example of yes and. Because yes and as a mindset, not as a, it's helpful within improvisation, but as a mindset, it's about here's a situation and here's how we build on that situation. Yes and using humor is I'm going to have to do this work anyway. I might as well find ways to make it fun. And that's adding humor to the workplace.
No, well said. I think it's so true, and I love your distinction because it's one that I subscribe to, and I've tried to make clear when I talk to people. It's funny is great, but that's an outcome, and it can be very daunting. It's like imagine people on the receiving end that have maybe no training. They're going, oh my God, that's a really high bar, and it's like, well, you don't have to hit that bar. Just have fun, lighten up, have some levity. If you have an attitude of fun, I think it just makes all the difference. And it is a mindset. And if you just can look at everything you do through that lens, it's so much better. I mean, if you're spending half your day in meetings or more, that can be painful. So if you can face that with kind of a yes and or a fun or make those meetings lighthearted in some way, and it's not, trivial, it's really about it's a human-based approach to dealing with people, then why not? Why shouldn't you do it?
Right, exactly. And I think the other thing to recognize is that you don't even have to be the creator of humor to use humor in the workplace. So one of the things that I teach is if you're not, great at writing your own humor, or you're intimidated by it, you can just share the humor that other people have created. You want to make sure that you give them credit and that you're not violating any copyright rules, but you can send a clip, a link to an interesting YouTube video that you saw, or a TEDx talk that you want people to watch, or listen to music or whatever it is. It doesn't mean that you have to be the sole creator of it. It just means that you have to be willing to kind of shepherd it into the work that you do and you're around with either your people or even specifically just for yourself.
Yeah. What are you seeing? Where do you recommend people start? Because I mean, you walk into some organizations, I'm sure, and it's all over the map. I mean, some cultures are really just very open by nature, and they have that sense of fun. They really are. And then there's cultures where I think it's slow. And maybe it's a big transition for them to think differently about it. So, and I recognize that it just depends where companies are at. But where do you usually tell people to start? Because fun is broad and it can be daunting. And if somebody wants to get their arms around just really their own department and sort of increasing fun in that department, what are some things you would recommend that they do to start with?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things help. The first is, understanding the value of it, certainly, like that we've talked about. And then I think you start kind of with yourself, and not necessarily the full self, but a lot of times people have split personalities. They have the person that is at home, their personal, like they hang out with their friends, they're maybe a little bit silly, they have fun, right? They laugh. And then they have the person that they bring to work, and it's just this sterile robot version of themselves.
Right.
And so part of it is bringing in that outside personality into the workplace so that you get to know people. Now, obviously, that being said, there's more limitations to it in the workplace, because if you are someone that likes very blue humor or very crass humor, not necessarily appropriate for the workplace. And so you want to do it in a certain way. And with that, it's thinking about being positive and being inclusive. There's 4 styles of humor as defined by psychologist R.A. Martin, and the first 2 are probably the most helpful for the workplace, because the first is affiliative humor. That's positive humor, that's inclusive, that brings everyone in, and it's about how are we all in this together. So think kind of the humor that Ellen DeGeneres uses on her shows. That's like affiliative humor. And then you have self-enhancing humor, and that's using humor as a way to enhance your certain situation. So that's listening to music while doing a repetitive task, or having fun questions that you ask at the beginning of each meeting, or whatever it is. It's ways to enhance your current situation, and those are positive examples of humor. They're inclusive. The other 2 styles, one is self-defeating humor, so that's using humor where it's negative humor, but the target is yourself. So it's kind of making fun of you. So a lot of times I'll joke about my voice, because it is certainly a little bit more nasally and higher than other people's. Not the manliest voice out there. Or my stature, etc. So that can be helpful. And then there's aggressive humor, which is using negative humor to try to manipulate other people, and that's something that's not appropriate for the workplace. So that would include sarcasm and satire and that kind of thing. And so you recognize, okay, based on my personality, what do I find fun? What do I naturally laugh at? And does it fit this mold of being positive and inclusive? And if so, let's start there. And I tell people to start with one thing a day. Try to find one thing in your day that you're like, all right, I'm going to add humor to this email, or the humor at the start of this meeting, or I'm going to add humor to my car ride home, right? Just pick one thing and start from there, and you'll start to see other ways, because it becomes a mindset, right? Like we talked about, improv as a mindset, or humor as a mindset, and it becomes something that you just naturally start to do.
Yeah, I love that. Little touches, I think, make a big difference. And if it's just sort of your signature line in your email, or something that people see frequently as sort of a low-hanging fruit touch, that feels maybe low risk to somebody, and not as daunting. And then they build their sort of muscle and work their way up. Because you and I both know it's a muscle, and it sort of comes with. For some people, it just is very natural, and for others, it's just find the things that work for you. And I think the good thing about the humor tent is that there's so many different ways and so many different tools that you can find something that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just get started. I'm always curious what you're seeing in terms of challenges that companies are facing where they go, we need to deal with humor. And it's interesting because humor's not a palliative kind of, it's not Band-Aid to a business culture hemorrhage. It just, but I think some companies kind of wait till it's too late and they're like, people are leaving. Hey, let's have, fun, wacky party time. It's like, no, that doesn't work. What are you seeing in terms of why companies are really open now? Is it more employee engagement? Is more because they recognize sort of a bottoms up, culture can also happen bottoms up. What's driving this, do you think?
I do think a large part of it's engagement, because like you mentioned at the very top, no one is searching for humor. No one's like, that what we really need is human workplace training. What we really need is improv training. It just happens to be a way to solve a lot of challenges. So it helps to solve communication challenges, helps to build relationships between people. It helps enhance problem solving, etc. And so part of the work that I'm doing along with other humorists that are out there is that, and other applied improvisers, is talking about the value of it, what it can help solve, so like what challenge are they looking for. And so I think people are more and more recognizing like, we have an engagement issue, we're having communication challenges. This could be one way that we solve that problem. And I think probably engagement is probably the big one. I think that another one that people don't necessarily pick up on that is valuable is turnover as well. Because as I mentioned, 31% of people leave a company because of their manager, and they've shown studies that employees who rate their manager's sense of humor as above average are less likely to look for a job within the next year. And so humor could be a way to, if we're giving the proper training to managers, could be a way that they help to decrease turnover in an organization. And so I think that's an area that is becoming a little bit more popular, but still is in the early phases.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, I see a lot of, I think the big topic that I see is just engagement. I mean, everyone's talking about engagement. They're looking for the way to engage. And it's so easy to be disengaged. When you just mentioned that quote, that's a big one. 31% of people out there become disengaged because of their manager, their immediate manager. And so they may not leave a company, but they'll leave a bad manager, somebody they perceive as that. And I think it's also a leadership skill. And I know you'll agree with me on this. I think it's becoming more important for leaders to really show that human side. And I think it's a few years old now, and I'm trying to remember the year that it came out, but I think 3 or 4 years ago, Robert Half International did a leadership study. What they found is that when they were recruiting for C-level positions, they found that of like the top 10 skills, humor was like number 3 or number 4. And it was interesting, but they found in their research of companies who recruited execs, they felt like it was so important that humor be a part of an adaptable mindset, that yes and mindset, that they found that recruiting executives that didn't have a sense of humor, they would not be successful in a dynamic environment, and especially in technology when things are changing so rapidly. If you don't have a sense of humor, you will not make it. And that was really the interesting part of that study.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one of those skills that's incredibly valuable because humor helps in so many different ways, because it helps with communication skills. It helps with building relationships. I mean, it's just very, very effective with other humans. And that's why it's so valuable. Because also when things don't go as planned, you need to be able to adapt. You need the improv skill sets. You need yes and you need a sense of humor about it, because the other area that it actually really helps is with stress relief, right? We know stress is incredibly, an incredibly challenging topic and something for us to work on, because there's that balance, right? Because stress by itself isn't a bad thing. It's how we as people grow. It's how we improve our skill set. It's how we push ourselves past our normal limits and get better. But chronic stress is a bad thing. We know all the negative effects of it. And so humor happens to be a way to relieve that stress and keep it so that we can hopefully stay somewhat sane.
Yeah, something we all need. Are you seeing companies out there that really are looking at it through that stress relief lens too? It is the communication thing. It is the engagement piece. Are you seeing many companies say, hey, our people work, 12-hour days. We have engineers that, as an engineer, when you're on deadline, you will work those kinds of hours, and it takes a toll. There's that burnout that we talked about. Are you seeing companies actually invest in it as a stress kind of relief or management program?
I mean, I think that they're starting to. I think that there's probably more opportunity within it to do it, because if you think of all the negative effects of chronic stress, so you think of higher blood pressure, muscle tension, headaches, all that kind of stuff. Humor and laughter is kind of the counterbalance to that. It's the superhero to the stress villain, essentially, because it increases blood flow throughout the body. It lowers blood pressure. It relaxes muscles. All these positive benefits. And so I think you're seeing some groups start to recognize that. You have great things like strategic disengagement, which is a wonderful phrase that comes from the Human Performance Institute in Florida, where it's like, we're not going to call it taking a break. We're going to call it strategically disengaging, so that you prevent burnout and you can come back to whatever it is you're working on with more focus and more creativity.
Yeah. Well, and in all these companies, I'm sure you see a common thread of things that people are facing and what's working. What's sort of the commonality around how people relate to humor? We're talking about some of it in context of burnout and all these other things, but what have you seen work? How much does somebody have to invest in it to get it to work? Obviously we've talked about it's nice if it's a part of your culture. If it's a cultural belief, that's great because it's baked into that environment. But we all know that sometimes a program here and there isn't going to make a difference unless people adopt that change. So what are you seeing that really sticks?
I think the big thing that sticks is personal ownership, right? We talked about going back to that individual. It's going to be up to an individual really to kind of commit to it, because one of the values that you get is when you do start to create it as a behavior and it becomes recognized as a pattern, people start to anticipate it in a positive way. And so if you know, so I was a project manager at Procter & Gamble for a number of years, and so my meetings would all start with something interesting, right? Like we ask an interesting question, or I'm sharing an interesting video, or whatever it is. And that taught people that, oh, his meetings are going to start on time and they're going to start with something interesting. So that trains people to be like, I don't want to miss his meetings, right? So even though you're going to, 4 hours worth of meetings each day, mine was the one on their calendar that's like, oh, I don't want to miss that one, and I don't want to be late because I'm going to miss the interesting thing. And so it changes people's behavior, and that's where it starts to become more accepted because people see it, and that will also spread. Other people say, oh, he's having, he's using it to his advantage. It's being a positive thing. Here, maybe I can do a little bit of it. So the real value is when it becomes a behavior change. It's not, oh, well, once I sent an email that had, a joke at the bottom. It's like, no, we want it to become a behavior, a mindset. That's where you get the most value out of it.
Right. And I love that. It's so important because I think we're so jaded from the whole team building thing and, team building. And when people hear team building, everybody's eyes roll. I mean, they do. And we've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. And I think because we really just have that Dilbert-esque image in our heads of we go to this training, it's so disconnected from the way we're treated day to day by the culture. And nothing changes and nothing's sustainable. And I really love that you're talking about taking personal ownership because I really do believe that's a big part of it. It is top down, but it's also a bottoms up responsibility to make sure that humor is a part of your world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like career management. No one's going to care more about your career than you. Even if you think you have a great manager, and even if you do, or even if you have a strong HR staff, at the end of the day, they're not going to sleep thinking about how do I get this person promoted or how do I get them. They're thinking about themselves. And at the end of the day, it's your own ownership over your career. It's the same way of your own ownership of how you enjoy your work. No one else is going to be responsible for, hey, you're doing a great job, but what's your, happiness level with the work that you're creating, or how many jokes are you telling, right? No one's going to pull you aside and ask you that. So it's about taking that personal ownership, and there's a handful of people that I've worked with that absolutely were in environments where that's a challenge and it wasn't welcome, and they would try something and they would get feedback back that they can't be silly or that kind of thing. And in that situation, one, you're learning something about the organization that you're working for, and the question is, do you want to stay there? And two, at the end of the day, no one can impact the way that you think about a situation. So one of the examples that I give is that when I read email, if I'm going through a bunch of email and I'm starting to get kind of disengaged from the email, one of the ways that I'll re-engage myself is I'll read the emails in an accent in my head. I'll pick an Irish accent or a British accent or whatever, and I just read the email that I'm going through. And it's not necessarily the most mind-blowing thing in the world, but it keeps me engaged, and it's something that no one can prevent me from doing, right? No one can control how I'm reading this email, so they can't change how I'm doing it.
I love that. Well, and it's interesting. I'm laughing a little bit because as somebody that also does stand up, I think about metrics, and I go, laughs per minute. And I'm gonna measure my success in humor in laughs per minute in a meeting. And it just, to those of us that sort of are a little silly sometimes out there in different venues, we have different ways of thinking about how funny pays off. And I'm wondering, kind of the conversations that you're having with organizations that you work with, how are they thinking about it in terms of investment? Because we have to talk about that pesky business thing called return on investment, and metrics, and they're important. And how are they connecting it to engagement? Because you're right, there is that. There's the short-term stuff, and then there's the long-term sustainable stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's interesting to quantify. Because certainly, like the value of a single laugh, you're going to burn about half of a calorie from a single laugh, right? And that's I think like 15% of a single M&M is half a calorie, right? But then if you laugh for 10 to 15 minutes, that burns as many calories as 5 minutes of aerobic exercise, 10 minutes of dancing, or 15 minutes of milking a cow, which is one of my favorite statistics.
Yes.
10 minutes of laughter is equivalent to 15 minutes of milking a cow. But the idea is that if you then do that over a year, you can lose up to 4 pounds. And if you do that over a lifetime, you're going to have those benefits of reduced stress, lower blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's sometimes hard to quantify a single instance of humor. But as you look at the body of work of what humor can do for an organization, you start to see what some of those statistics are out there, like turnover, as we talked about earlier, where studies show that managers that use humor have a lower turnover, which is impactful because they estimate the cost to replace an employee at between 20% to 150% of that person's salary. Right, and so I did actually just recently did a talk on the ROI of some of the stuff that we do, and so I know that the average income, at least of I think 2 years ago in the United States, was around $44,000. So if you assume an average salary of $44,000 and the low estimate that it costs 20% to replace an employee, which is usually a lot higher, that means that every employee that you lose, you're costing the company $8,864, I think is the actual number that comes out. So then you start to work with organizations and you say, okay, if we were able to decrease turnover by 10 employees, then you're looking at 10 times $8,864 as your savings for that event. And then whatever the base charge is for it, you can start to look at the ROI. So you can start to calculate things like that. You can look at increased productivity in the workplace. You can look at reduced healthcare costs, because in one study they found that I think it was $68 billion in increased healthcare costs for stress-related, for people who were rated as high stress at work. You took the percentage of the number that was, it equated to about $700 per stressed employee each year. And that was, that was additional healthcare costs. It wasn't an impact on, didn't talk anything about absenteeism. It didn't talk anything about the cost of presenteeism. It didn't talk anything about the cost of disengagement. It just said the actual physical or hard savings that you would have for each employee is $700. So then again, you look at an organization and say you do an event for 100 people and you're able to help them reduce their stress and manage their stress. What's the savings that you gain in healthcare costs?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. And I think this ROI thing is really important. And there are ways, and I think we're getting better in all of us, especially with applied improv and humor and all these different things, of quantifying it and making the business case. And we're seeing more of that. And, I think there is that, we've always looked at it from a reducing turnover, and all these things are really important, and they matter. I also suspect, and I haven't seen any studies on it, but it seems to me you could also extrapolate if you could, and if you looked at the productivity of everybody being better because of humor, probably revenue generated on a per employee basis, I'm sure goes up as well. I'm sure we're looking at the upside, not just sort of the reducing costs, but the actual top line generation goes up. And I also think the communication issue that we talked about earlier, if you can change the dynamics in your organization over communication using humor, what that wouldn't do for hitting deadlines, for time to market, for less turnover with your customers, less customer defection. So I think there is that top line that I think we're just scratching the surface on, understanding these dynamics, but that's something too.
Absolutely. There was I think it was in the last couple of years, a fund that started, a mutual fund that started, that only invests in the top places to work. So if you look at the, Forbes best 100 places to work, that kind of stuff, they only invest in companies that they say are a good place to work because of studies, outside external studies, and that kind of stuff. And what they found is the return on those companies, their performance was actually higher than the S&P. It outpaced the S&P over the last, I think, 10 years. With its results, because it was just companies that invested back in their employees. So you start to see, there is a correlation in some way between groups that treat their employees well and also allow this idea of humor, allow this idea of improv, allow this idea, or care about this thing about happiness and in workplace satisfaction and engagement, etc., and the results that they ultimately get. Whether that's through improved customer service or improved customer experience or better marketing or whatever it is, there are these positive things, and so it does really lead to better results.
No question. And so this stuff is real, and it's nice that, for years I think we talked about it sort of in soft ROI measures, and to some degree it is, because some of those benefits you don't see immediately. It takes a little bit of time. However, I think we're seeing enough, science and case studies behind that to actually show that, in fact, yeah, there is causality. There's or at least a very high good correlation between having this kind of stuff and then how you're doing in the workplace or out in the marketplace, I should say. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and there's a study that talked about that on an individual level as well. It tracked executives, and they found executives who used humor were paid more. And they saw that it was positively correlated. So the more humor the executive used, the more they were paid. And so it's not only at the large scale, but also at the individual level. And I think that's what's so powerful about humor is that it's a benefit for not just the individual, but also the organization. And they go kind of hand in hand and both rise up.
Oh, no question. And I think I saw something in Harvard Business Review about that study I think that you're alluding to. And they also found that the leaders that exhibited humor were more liked and thought to be more intelligent. Now, whether or not they were, perception is the reality that matters.
Yeah, for sure.
And it did relate to how much they were paid and their mobility within the organization. If they can be good with people, and let's face it, if you're good with people, that's part of your career trajectory, as you're talking about your own career development. So taking responsibility for your own humor development, I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you see a lot of stuff out there, and we are all familiar with the Southwests and the Zappos and sort of the usual suspects. Is there any company out there that you've come across that you're like, wow, they're like just a fun company. They live and breathe fun. It's a part of everything they do. And they sort of set a standard maybe for really what it means to have fun be a cultural value.
Yeah, I mean, in the work that I've done, I haven't necessarily seen a company. I mean, I think there's definitely companies that have it as part of their values, like we've said, Southwest, Zappos, Lego, at least from what I've read and experienced, seems to be, one of those companies that embraces it as well. Certainly some more startups that are out there, more of the startup feel, incorporate those elements as well. But I think what impresses me more and what I see more of is individuals. People who it's almost one of those mindsets where it doesn't matter if they are working in the mailroom or it's a different person working at senior leadership. There's someone that just absolutely enjoys what they do, and they find ways to make it more fun, not just for themselves, but for other people. And I think that's what has impressed me more and what I'm seeing more and more of. Is the individual level within their microcosm of the world that they control, their circle of influence, to talk Covey about it. They're having an impact in a positive way using humor.
Yeah, and I love that you're an engineer, because I think engineers get a bad rap. And so often, it's the robotic engineer, and it's like, it's the efficiency mindset you talked about. And, in some organizations, I'm sure there's still that mentality that, the people stuff, the soft skills are in fact that and don't matter. But I'm seeing, and I'm sure you see this every day, I'm seeing more and more engineering organizations, technical organizations say, you know what, because this is really the way that we build products is collaborative. And guess what? It's all about people working together to hit deadlines. So it can't be robotic. And I'm seeing some of the biggest champions of applied improv anyway become out of the technical space.
Yeah.
And it's really refreshing and wonderful to see.
Yeah, and I think it's something, and it's a lot on, I work a lot with tech groups and engineers because of my background, and also because of that language of, we talked right up at the top, efficiency versus effectiveness. Wow. And because humans have emotions and feelings, right, we have to be effective. We have to change the way that we do things. And the true engineers recognize that, okay, it's not about this short-term efficiency, right? It's like, the example that I give a lot of times, I want to be able to send an email that just says, do this thing, right? But instead, I'm sending the email that says, hey, so-and-so, hope you had a great weekend. Hey, I was wondering if you could do this thing by this day. Anyway, I'll see you at the happy hour later, best regards or whatever, right? We have all that additional keystrokes, but because we know it's long-term effective about building the relationship with a human as opposed to sending a command to a computer. Yeah. And I think people recognize that. I think they're seeing that difference and realizing that, that's what's going to help give us the best results long term.
Yeah. And it's nice that we're seeing that even as we are we're so reliant on technology that the human side still matters. Although steeped in Silicon Valley, I still see I still do see the silliness, and I get there's such a data mentality, which I understand and I respect. We have to have the data. It can get a little silly. You know, I was in a conversation, you'll appreciate this, not too long ago, and we were talking about helping people engage more in their work. And this very large company said to me, well, you know, we did a study. We had to have data. We had to have data show that this was the case. And I said, so what did your data show you? And she said, well, you know, we ran all these, you know, correlating factors, and, you know, we looked for lines of best fit. They did a whole like regression analysis, all this stuff. And she comes back and she says, well, you know, what we learned is that people want to do meaningful work. And I just chuckled, because it's like I hear you. Mm-hmm. I don't think we needed a study to show us that. Right. but I applaud that there's this funny kind of Silicon Valley mentality that about numbers. Yeah. But we still have to remember, to your point, it's all about human beings, and human beings don't change no matter how tech savvy we get. We still want to love the work that we do. We want to find meaning in it. We want to laugh and enjoy our work. Yeah.
Well, and numbers just help us quantify that a little bit better. It helps clarify the picture, I think, in some ways. But that is so funny. Of course, yeah, that's going to be the study back of like, when people enjoy what they do, they have higher workplace satisfaction scores, and they're also more engaged and less sick days and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, there's studies to back that up, but it's also a kind of like sense in a way. But yeah, we want the numbers. We want to see, because I don't know, as an engineer, I want to do things that work. And I think that's what makes me so passionate about humor, is that I recognized it in my own work, but when I got really excited about it was when I saw the studies, when I saw that they had shown that it works in this area. And that's like, oh yeah, the fact that it's fun and, you know, you enjoy your work more, that's great. But the reason why I like it is because it leads to better results. And so, yeah, it makes sense to have kind of that numbers-driven thing. But yeah, it is, of course, funny of like, yeah, spend all this money, do all this surveying. And it's like, yep, people want to enjoy what they do and feel like it has meaning.
Makes sense. Well, and that to your point, it is important, because, what we do, what you do, what I do, what people like us do, it is about getting better outcomes for business. And if there wasn't the reality of that, we wouldn't do what we do. No. So we do want to base it on some data. And you're absolutely right. It's just, it's a little comical, because no matter how big the company, how engineering oriented, it always comes down to, with this kind of stuff, people. And people don't change. People really, again, this is a human dynamic issue. And regardless of how savvy you are as your company, if people aren't happy, it doesn't really matter. That's the bottom line.
Yep, exactly.
So what would you say, Drew, to the company out there that's like, I hear you, I get it. I think we could use something like that. We could engage people better. We could probably have better communication. Where would you tell them kind of to start? Because it can be overwhelming to start thinking about bringing some of this stuff in little by little. And there is the personal stuff. But if there's a company out there thinking about doing something like that, what would you say?
I would say that I think that it certainly starts a lot of times with an expert sharing some of those ideas. You want people to, share the ideas in a larger group setting so that people have the understanding and the framework. I think people being on the same page of all understanding the value is very, very important. And so whether it's sharing an article that they find and getting it widespread, or even better, having an expert come in and kind of talk about it and demonstrate it as well, I think is a powerful way. Because like I said, a lot of it comes from an individual basis of people deciding to do it. Now, that being said, there is things that you can help. You can look to reward, like people follow metrics and people follow what they're rewarded by. And so if you start to look to reward people for some of these things in terms of, having weekly kudos or thank yous that people send out, or, a yearly humor awards where people share the different things, right? The things that people are going to get recognized for, those are the same things that they're going to do more of. And so I think you can start to implement those types of things. I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is for people to understand that they have permission to do it. And that permission can come from someone way up high, it can come from the CEO, or a lot of times it can come from someone else where an individual takes, again, that ownership to try it. And there's plenty of resources out there. I know you have resources on it. I have resources on it, that kind of thing. And so there's things that people can use to help, but a lot of it comes down to making the decision to want to do it.
Yeah, great point. Again, the personal responsibility, you just can't get away from that. I think that's really important. And I love that you frame it as a career thing. It's you manage your career. Why would you not also manage your humor quotient and your personal development? Yeah. I think that's really important. And not give that up to somebody else, like a company that you may not stay at. That's really a career and leadership growth thing. And I love that. I also love your point, because I don't think we talk about it enough, of just recognition. When you build recognition, you provide an incentive and reinforce the behavior you want to see. And everybody likes to be recognized. And I love your idea of giving out awards, because so much of what people want isn't monetary. We know that. We know the studies that say that there's only so much money that people can be making. But if they're unhappy, they're unhappy. And more money at them isn't going to make them happier. But recognition in a human workplace will. And exactly. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy, but just recognizing that people are trying, I think, can be such a huge motivator. And we forget to do that, you know, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So I love that. Are you still doing the humor awards? I know for a while you were doing humor awards. Do you still? I
was, yeah. I took this past year off just because of travel and focus and stuff like that, but I want to bring it back next year for sure, because it is a way to recognize people to do things. And you know, even if it's not an organization, you know, they get some of that validation, that recognition from somewhere else, and it's a great way to source ideas. So you know, you learn what some cool people are doing, and you can share that out with other people, and they can be like, oh, we could do that same thing, or we can do something similar. So it helps promote things in a lot of ways. And so we didn't do it this past year, but next year it'll be coming back.
I love it. I think that's a great idea, because sometimes just hearing what other people are doing, and there's no shortage of really great ideas out there. And if you need inspiration, seeing what works for other organizations and adopting it for your own department, at least starting with the area that you do control, which is your immediate surroundings. So I love that. Drew, what you got coming up that you want to share with everybody? You got anything on the horizon?
Well, let's see. I am within the next month, I will have spoken and performed in the contiguous 48 states, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, which is super fun. So if anyone has anything in Alaska or Hawaii, that's what I'm looking towards next, is how to get there. But I'll be speaking at the Applied Improv Network, which we're both members of in Montreal, Canada, in September, which will be a lot of fun. And that's probably, so thinking about it, probably the next public event that I'm doing. I do also have an online humor course that people can check out, and an online book, or a digital book also on Kindle, that kind of stuff, that is 501 ways to use humor. I created it out of this idea. So many people are like, okay, I'm interested in using humor, I don't know how. Well, this book is just a list of a bunch of resources, so you can flip to any page and pick an idea, or you can say, oh, I want to send humor in an email. You turn to the section on communication. There's 20 different ways to send in an email, just as a way to get people started on things that they can do. So that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, is creating the resources, so that, you know, I got into humor by basically getting a degree in computer science and engineering, working at Procter & Gamble for 6 years as a project manager, and having done improv and stand-up for 10 years now, or whatever it is. Like, I'm to this point now. I'm trying to make that a much shorter for other people, so that they don't have to be like, well, just do improv for 10 years and you'll get it. Like, how do we give them the resources so they don't have to do that? And so that's what's available on the website and other areas.
I love that. And to Drew's point, you know, that's great, because again, there's so many ideas. You don't have to use them all. Just you pick one thing and you do that consistently, you can see a difference in your world immediately. And that's what I love about it. There's so many great ideas. Just pick a couple that work for you. And I think that's really low-hanging fruit and a great way to get started. And then, Drew, what's your Twitter handle?
I am at Humor That Works on Twitter. It's down there on the bottom. Right.
There it is. There it is, everybody. What I can't see. And it's humorthatworks.com. Drew, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. And You bet. We'll have you back. And everybody, you can find me at keepingithuman.com. And I won't be at the Applied Improv Network conference this year. So, it'll be great. I know Drew will be great. And I can't wait to catch up with everybody later. So thanks so much. And we'll see you all at the next episode. Thanks so much, Drew. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.